Thank you for joining me on the most recent episode of the All Things Endurance podcast. I'm excited for our show today. Our guest is our very own Cindy Abrami, and she is going to be talking today about how to structure a group training program, whether it be running, cycling, or whatnot, all the nuances that are involved with that. It's something that I think a lot of people want to do, but really don't know how to execute on, and including myself. So I'll be anxious to learn from Cindy. So without further ado, Cindy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to talk about this.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. My wife had a run club when we lived in New York City, and it was well attended and it went really well. But I never really appreciated everything that went on with it and all the background stuff.
Right.
So, and I'm guessing a lot of other runners are sort of in my shoes where they might want to do something like this. They're familiar with one-on-one or, doing it over online, but not so much in person, and then the group dynamic. So before we get started, could you tell me just a little bit, or tell our listeners, I should say, a little bit about yourself, as well as, your history with the group training process?
Yeah. Thank you for offering that. Just a little bit about my background as a runner, and my experience through the years. So my relationship with running goes way back to like right out of the womb. And I was one of those weird kids that went out the door, say, "Hey mom, I'm going to go out and play." And my play was I'd like run laps around the outside of the house with my dog. So, I came out of the womb running and really identify as a runner. Basically, if somebody were ever to ask me, like, what are you? Who are you? What do you do? It's always like, well, I'm a runner. That was always the first thing out of my mouth. But at some point, my mom kind of picked up on my oddness as a child. And she said, "Hey, there's this thing called cross country." And I'm like in fourth grade. I'm like, "Oh, cross country, what is that?" And she says, "Well, you just go run." And I'm like, "Oh, you mean like this is a thing? Like you can actually go do this and it's a thing?" So I'm
sport.
This little kid. Yeah. So I feel like I was really fortunate to have opportunities to be on teams and stuff. So early on, like I went to a school that had a cross country and track team. And then, of course, throughout school, I stayed with it. I never stopped and went through college. It actually paid for my college, which I'm forever grateful for. And I got to be on some really good competitive teams and so forth. And so I really appreciated the whole team atmosphere and all of that coaching I got early on, like through the 70s. I mean, I was thinking about the decades, 70s, 80s, every decade, like basically. I was born in the 60s, but I was only two, so all of that experience. But with all of those team experiences also came that pressure. And so I associated running on a team and having a coach as like a high pressure situation. You have to prove yourself, and you have to be fast, and you're kind of always competing with your teammates, actually. When I graduated from college and no longer had that situation, I got to go and run without pressure and really enjoy it as an individual. And so sorry, I'll make this quick, but fast forward a little bit. Then I had kids and I still competed. I mean, I've been a competitive runner the whole time, never stopped competing, but wasn't that serious about it and really enjoyed it for a while. But then there's that component of it that became sort of lonely, and it's an individual sport, but there's so many ways to make it a team sport in a good way, positive way. So, but I had moved to a new location in San Diego, actually, and came across this. This is going back into the 90s with the very early stages of doing the charity programs. So team and training was what I came across, and they were going to train for the Honolulu Marathon, which, number one, I swore I'd never do a marathon, and that is to date the only one I've ever done. But if I'm going to do a marathon, doing it for a cause would be the only reason I do it. And I thought, oh, this is cool. I'll get to learn all the running routes and meet people and so forth. So basically that was my sort of post high pressure situation into a, wow, the most fun thing I've ever done literally with running in my life. Like I was so surprised by, and we only met once a week, and it was like a 4-month training program, but we traveled together. I gained relationships through that experience that were so serendipitous, and anyways, I had a whole experience there that I thought, oh, this is just the greatest thing. So that sort of talks a little bit about my sort of early stages with that kind of a concept. And then fast forward a little later, I then became a coach at some point, some years ago now. But when I did that step, I thought, well, I want to make sure that at least part of what I offer as a coach includes that experience, because it was just really kind of life-changing for me. It's not the charity part. I mean, that was awesome too. That was certainly awesome, but it was more the connection and the no pressure, but friendliness of the group atmosphere. So yeah, that's a little bit about how I got acquainted with it.
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, the Team in Training is a pretty amazing organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had some friends who were coaches for that, and they enjoyed the experience for sure.
Right. Yeah, it was awesome.
That's great. So how long did you do that for, the Team in Training? Was it just that one time?
Yeah, I just did it that one time, and it was early on. That was, that was before computers. And we had to write letters to, you had to get donations for the charity, obviously. So it was just 4 months. So it was like a training. It was a marathon, obviously a marathon training program. So it had a start and end, 4 months.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So maybe this is a good way to segue into this next thing to talk about. So the other thing my wife did when we were in New York City, she did Girls on the Run. She was a coach for Girls on the Run, which is, I believe, for middle school girls. It's an after-school program, and it culminates with them running a 5K. It's a national organization, and it's really great. But I think that's again a good segue into this next one, as far as what are some of the different demographics, as far as, obviously there's adults, there's kids. Obviously, if you're doing kids, you're probably going to keep it more fun and less technical and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Definitely.
But again, I think, some of the ways that, again, I would be a little bit freaked out if I were going to probably start a group fitness or a group running program, is what are some of the ways they can be structured? What are some of the different ways that runners can sort of organize these things? Yeah,
that's such a good question. And I want to be clear on kind of what we're talking about, because there are different ideas behind group fitness and so forth. And so what we're generally talking about is putting together a group of runners, or I would say you could also look at it as multi-sport. You could do running groups and multi-sport groups, bringing people together to train together for any reason. So that would just be sort of the broad category, versus if you're looking at coaching situations, there's the one-on-one situation, and then there's the group situation. But the way the kind of the two categories I think that I kind of break it up into is that you can do a free, you basically donate your time, whether it be for a running store or for the local running club or tri club, or even just creating your own, but just making it free. And that those tend to be and can often be just sort of ongoing things. We just do a fun run every Sunday. And we, it's just part of whatever. And you can use, just by the way, meetup.com is a really great way to do that. It can be used for paid or free, but it's a really good way to sort of do your own version of this. But then there's also the for-profit, like if a coach or even an athlete who wants to do a program like this, doesn't have to be like a formal coach necessarily, can charge a fee. And probably that's more what I'll talk about as we go through the different discussion today, because from a coaching perspective, and we have this discussion a lot just in UESCA, and I've had lots of conversations with coaches that want to do something like this. That's a little more structured, that the for-profit would be a little bit more structured and have some components to it that really need to be planned out and thought through a little more detail. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So that being said, what are some things that a coach would need to think about before starting, perhaps maybe both sort of a free, as well as again, as you noted, for-profit running club?
Yeah. So yeah, actually, so if you're going to structure it, and this is kind of an important checklist and probably the most, I don't know, the thing that we discuss the most when I'm talking with other coaches about this. But all of the things that you need to think about if you're going to go ahead and structure a program. One of them is, in most cases, there's going to be a goal, an end to it. So it's usually going to be a race of some sort. I will say during COVID, because I have done so many of these programs now as a coach, and we had a group ongoing, and we got to COVID, and actually one of the races we were training for, in process of training for, of course, got canceled. And so we actually did a couple of programs during that period of time that didn't have a goal race, but we created a goal. So we had some time trials and some different things. But one way or the other, there's sort of like this is what we're going to be training for. I'm saying this from the perspective of, this is what I know works really well. Again, it's not the only way to do it. So first of all, start with, what are you going to train for? And you can pick events. Actually, a good idea is to pick events that maybe have an epic location, not far away, but maybe the location's a draw, or maybe it's just a local race and you're going to, bring everybody together to support the local race director, a popular race locally. And that you can also find races and this is helpful, that have different distances. So maybe it's got a half marathon, a 10K, a 5K, or something like that they offer. So having something like that will broaden who can actually participate in your program. So those are all sort of things to think about when you're thinking, well, what are we going to train for? It could be a trail race too. It's another cool thing to do. Like I mentioned, you want to possibly go with distances that would be kind of popular. If the race offers a 5K and then a longer distance, that works really well, because you've got your beginner sort of athletes maybe you want to target, but then also that those people that want to go a little longer, maybe have other goals. So you've got to broaden your audience there by choosing the right kind of race or goal. But important is to figure out, this is the thought process when you're starting out. You have to think about, when is your program going to start? You know when your race is going to be, so you have to think back, how many weeks do I need to train this group, depending on the distance. And I actually have guidelines for that I'll go over, I think, later. But just know that you've got to think that through. Like, we're going to start, we've got a race in July, maybe we're going to start it's going to be a 10-week program. So here's our start date. And even more than that, you have to give yourself, beyond that, like 6 to 8 weeks ahead of that start date to actually market it. So we have to remember that whole big, broad piece for this. So think about your start dates. And you want to think about, like, how many days a week are you going to get together and train? So it's a group training program, so we need to have opportunities to get together as a group. And I have found that 1 to 2 days a week is like really ideal. But if you're going to do 2 days, that second day needs to be something creative, I would say. Because if you go like, okay, one of our days that we're going to get together is our long run, and that's on a weekend, and that's like always the popular one. Everybody wants to do that. That's probably the main training day. But if you're going to do something midweek, you might want to do something more quality, which would make sense. But just, I have found doing just a hard quality workout is not very attractive for people. They have, maybe have never done that. So I can talk about, like, even I think later on I'll talk about some ideas of what you might implement there for that second day. But decide what days you're going to train on and what time of day, and kind of think about what works for people, generally speaking. So if it's a midweek thing, it's probably going to have to be in the evening or in the morning as far as that goes. A weekend, not so difficult to figure that out. So figure out your training days, your locations, and your routes. And it's kind of funny, all the things you really do have to think about. You don't have to have routes planned 10 weeks in advance, but just think about how you might want it, because you could do a different location every week for your long run, and you could do it from a coffee house, and then then you've got your coffee house there when you're done, and that's a really fun thing. So think about your locations. It might also be race specific. So if you're training for a trail race, you might want to just go to different trails in your area. So locations matter. You want to think about the fee you're going to charge. And then again, now we're going back to structure. So we're going to charge something maybe. I have guidelines for that as well, but you obviously need to come up with what you think you'll want to charge. And just remember too, this is the cool thing, wonderful thing about a group training program. It's got multiple benefits, but one of them for the coach is that you can leverage your time. So you can charge maybe very little, make it really, really friendly fee. But if you get, a good number of people coming out, it's more than well worth your time financially. So that's a bonus. Some other little things you want to think about if you've got that goal race, reach out to the race director and let them know what you're doing, and possibly, ask if they would be willing to give you a discount code, because again, you'd want to have that kind of information up front when you advertise. Or sometimes race directors, and they generally love knowing that you're doing this, and like, hey, I'm going to bring a group of people to your race, and they're very willing to work with the coach on that. And sometimes they make you the official training partner of the race, which is, so that's kind of fun. So so make sure you reach out to the race director one way or the other. You can decide whether you want a charity component to it. So I know I've done, the team in training is purely done for charity, whereas these would maybe not be. But maybe you'll collect food for the food bank or something along the way, or do something for a charity, which is also something that you could advertise when you're marketing it out. Let's see. You're going to want, obviously, so you're going to want, I would suggest offering them a training plan, and it's not going to be individualized exactly, but it could be semi-individualized. So that's not something that has to be done again, 10 weeks in advance, but you're going to want to have that ready once the program starts. And I can talk a little bit more to that later, but semi-individual would mean basically you've got levels of them. So maybe you've got a beginner, maybe a run walk version, and an intermediate and an advanced, depending. And then I can talk later again about how you might help somebody know what level they are, that type of thing. The last thing is sort of like, how are you actually going to get people registered for your program? So are you going to have a web page, that whole piece of it? But it can be as simple as putting out the information in email, on social media, and then just getting paid through Venmo. It can be informal, doesn't have to be a big registration process. But if you happen to have that, if you have a website and you know how to do that, that's another thing to think about, and that's going to be done when you start marketing. So it's a lot to think about.
A lot of steps. So a question I just thought of, two of the things that you noted specifically with that is, for example, if you're going to have, you choose a race that has maybe everything from a 5K up to a half marathon or a marathon, or if you have runners, which I'm guessing you would, of different abilities at different speeds. So let's say we're training for, Rick Prince's incredible ultimate best ever marathon, and we also offer a 10K. And in your training program, in your group training program, you have a 10K as well as a marathon. Obviously they're going to be running different distances. Now, would you need to have like an assistant per se? So let's say I'm training for it. I'm in the 10K group and you're the marathon coach. How would that work? How would you structure that, with the different, with different abilities, different speeds, as well as people training for different distances, assuming they're all meeting at the same time?
Right. Yeah. And actually that, regardless of whether somebody's training for a different distance or not, they're all probably going to be doing a different distance on the day. So, you don't necessarily need to have, multiple coaches or, generally speaking, we've got like, we come to our, let's see, well, the way I do the training programs is, so let's just say the beginner group is going to be doing a 3-mile today, and or we'll do it by time. So we're all going to be running an hour, and that's going to be a different distance, obviously, for everybody. But what ends up happening on the day is whatever it is that person's supposed to do for their particular race, they're going to go out and do it. There's going to be other people there doing the same thing. So I always encourage them to try to find people approximately their speed and doing the same thing, and they can kind of stick together. So I will say you need to be real careful with your guidelines as far as if you're offering different distances. And you've got let's just say we're going to do a half marathon and it has a 5K as well. And we're going to be doing a 10-week program. And I know that if somebody's just starting out as a runner, there's no way they're going to be ready for a half marathon in 10 weeks. So I would tell that group, I would only have, let me just put it this way, I'd only have a half marathon training plan for intermediate and advanced. Okay. I wouldn't offer one to the beginner group. They would just say that they could do their, and any of them could do the 5K, but does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. So everyone's sort of doing the same thing, but their own, everyone's showing up at the same time, doing their own workout, whatever that is for the day. And like you said, if you're meeting up at a place at the end, everyone just sort of meets up there when they're done. See, I would do the 5K. That way I could get to the donut shop early, eat a bunch of donuts before the marathon people finish.
Exactly.
That's the strategy.
Well, truthfully, I haven't done one that had a marathon group and a 5K group. I've only done half. So that, if you'd have a lot of time to hang out at the donut.
Yeah, for sure. So you spoke about the coaches, kind of how to structure it. Now, from an athlete standpoint, what benefit is there with the group training program for athletes? And maybe you also want to kind of talk about it, not just what's the benefit for athletes as a whole, but also maybe, in contrast with maybe one-on-one training, maybe you're just running with one person or by themselves, so on and so forth.
Yeah. That's well, of course, having experienced so much team training in my past, both high pressure and low pressure. It is vastly different, for a given athlete to be in a one-on-one relationship with the coach where maybe they're doing all their training on their own, they're getting the plan on doing it on their own versus having these opportunities to do things with other people. And of course the benefit, I just feel like everybody benefits when it's group training. It's always more fun. For it, if it's a quality workout, you're probably going to get more out of yourself as an athlete if you're doing it with other people. But also just that there's something that happens with training buddies. We all know it. All of us who've trained, there's some sort of a connection that happens when you're suffering together, whether it's just a long, 12-mile run in the heat, but you're conversational. Running can be so social, and you really develop wonderful connections. So I think above all, that is the greatest benefit for athletes. There's also, of course, the motivation factor. They wouldn't go do it maybe if they had to go do it by themselves. And that's a common thing. They need the support and they want the accountability. So I'll talk about some ways actually to make the group a little more accountable, a few ideas to make it beneficial that way. And this is another interesting thing. And it depends on the group, of course, but there's so much wisdom out there in the running world. And this is a way to bring inexperienced and experienced athletes together too. And I think,
good point.
And it's like that veteran athlete has somebody to pour into, that inquisitive, new athlete. So it doesn't always have to be the coach giving all the advice, so the athletes themselves support one another and relate to one another. So I think that kind of sums up, I call that purpose-driven mutual benefit there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, I think the athlete and the coach feel good about supporting a race and maybe a local race director. So there's that benefit.
Yeah.
But on the coach's side, the interesting thing is, and again, this goes back to the discussion I hear a lot, coaches talking about a lot, and we have in the world a lot of newer coaches trying to get experience. Kind of, I don't know if they're introverted like me. Like the funny thing is that I'm personally much more comfortable working with a group than I am one-on-one. Like I just like that atmosphere better, and I am introverted. So it actually benefits a coach that way, but just getting experience, whether you're doing it for a fee or you're donating your time, you're out there coaching a group of athletes and you're just getting experience. So I think that's like huge. I really, really have always appreciated even just donating my time to do like the weekly track workout for our tri club. I used to do that in-kind sponsorship. So another thing is for a coach, they're just getting exposure to the athletic world. They're also they're becoming more involved in their athletic community. So I just think that it's like a win-win-win situation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that, I think a lot of people discount maybe, or at least coaches or maybe even athletes as well, when they first get into the group coaching and the group, training dynamic, they don't really think about the social component. They're thinking primarily for a training. As I mentioned, my wife had that run club, and one of the runs she did was down the West Side Highway in Manhattan. It's a pretty skinny trail, so you're sharing with other people. So the most you can run is sort of, two abreast, and you end up talking with that person. And I remember I was running with this one woman, and you just get to talking like, what do you do? How long have you lived here? And I remember asking her what she did, and she said, oh, I interview old rich people for a living. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. So we talked more. It turns out she worked for the Wall Street Journal, and she was the main point person to interview Warren Buffett. So she would fly out to Omaha on a frequent basis to interview. I'm like, well, he definitely qualifies as an old rich person. So you meet some interesting people for sure.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So if I were a coach and I wanted to get into, putting on a group training program, what are some of the guidelines? I mean, you spoke about some of them, but what are some of the other guidelines that I would probably need to know if I wanted to put on a group training program as a coach?
Yeah. So I kind of mentioned what you have to think through, but as far as like when it comes right down to the nitty gritty, again, this is going to go back to, I didn't really mention in my background how many of these programs I've done, but pretty much all of my coaching career has involved these group training programs. And so I feel like, trial and error, you kind of figure out what's the best sweet spot for different things, different little pieces that you have to think through. Guideline number one is, it's already been mentioned, but trying to target an event that reaches a more diversity, I guess, just that beginner to maybe the advanced person. Something epic is always a great idea. And I'm talking about that too from the perspective of, it's not always easy to get a bunch of people to your program. So there's a lot of little things that you can do to make it more interesting. So that's one of them. Just, really think through that goal event distance wise. And then as far as, this is the other important thing, a length of a training program is important because you don't want to underbake somebody and not have them prepared. That would be irresponsible. And you also don't want a training program necessarily to just go on forever and ever and ever, so having that, and this is why having a structured program that's not it's a little bit different than having that year round, we always meet and run on this day. That doesn't have a start and end point, doesn't have a goal. It's really important to have a start and end point because that helps people, number one, get into it thinking, well, okay, I can do anything for 10 weeks. And that's great. It's not like a forever thing. I can do it. But then also, as I mentioned, you have to make sure they're trained. So guidelines, generally speaking, for 5K 8K, 10K, it would probably need to be minimum of 8 to 10 weeks, generally speaking. So I would usually go with that length of program. If it's going to include a half marathon or 15K, something that, I don't know, middle distance, if that's what that is, it might need to be 10 to 12. And keep in mind, you might be doing a 5K and a half marathon, but make sure the half marathon is what you're using to base your just the program length on. And then a marathon needs to be still 16 weeks, I would say minimum, and possibly 20 weeks. So those ones obviously are very long, and they are tedious, but yeah. So that would be that kind of a guideline for how long the program should be. Okay. Really important. The training plans, I mentioned this already. You would want to have, and this is the cool thing. I mean, once you've written these training plans, and again, they're not highly individual, so they can be reused. Once you've got them, you've got them. So these programs are repeatable, and I would do like 3 a year, basically. Like fill up the whole year with 3 different programs. Fits nicely, but you're gonna want a training plan for each distance that you're training for, and then I would always suggest 3 levels again, beginning, intermediate, and advanced, making sure that, like I mentioned, they have enough time to train. So a beginner is not going to be doing a half marathon and be ready for it in 8 weeks, right? So or 10 weeks. Yeah, so be responsible with that. And this is where you can also give the athlete guidelines. And usually, because when you're going out and doing a long run, you can do it by distance or you can do it by time, but you kind of want to give the athletes some idea of which program they sort of fit into. And so I usually will determine that based on the very first long run that we've got planned. And I've thought that through, like our goal distance or race, backtracking how we need to progress it. And so when we're starting, so if we're going to get ready, you might need to be able to at least run 4 miles, at the beginning. So you kind of base it on that. Say your first long run is going to be 4 miles for an intermediate runner, 6 miles for an advanced runner. You let that be their guide to know which plan they're probably going to fit best into. So just let's see, a few guidelines there. I mentioned, I think 1 to 2 group workouts a week is ideal. 1 for sure. And if you're going to just do 1, it's going to be the long run. And that's always the best one to do together. But if you're going to do that second one, here's an idea of some of the things we did that got everybody going midweek. If I just said we're going to go do 400 repeats on the track, 2 people would be there like, yeah, that doesn't sound fun, right? So I used to put together our combo workouts. It could include speed work, but it also includes strength and maybe some plyometrics. And so we would set a 45-minute timer. Using time is always great in group workouts anyways. And we're going to loop through, you're going to run to the tree and back as hard as you can. If you're not on a track, you can use a landmark. So basically, let's say we're going to do a 400 hard. We're going to get back. We're going to do a plank for a minute. We're going to do hop on one foot up, the other foot back, just some plyometrics in there, get some shoulder taps in there, and dips, a few little strength moves, and then finish it off with a 200 hard, and you're just going to loop through that for 45 minutes. And I know that may not sound fun, but it's so fun to do that. Okay. Stuff. You kind of recover with the plank and anyways. But we used to do that in where I was before doing these programs at a stadium where we got to do stadiums that was available. Cool. So we would have, we would include the stadiums in there. And I'll say, so that was super fun. We'd do it on midweek evening. So just an idea there. Routes. So, as I think through this, is so much like planning a race itself, but you always have to be really clear on everybody needs to know where they're going. So for every week or every group run that we're going to do, we need to have a map somehow. It needs to be thought out, obviously. And we need to think through the different distances, and often an out and back works best, so same map, just turn around here. If you're this group, turn around there. If you're that group, and then you go all the way to the end if you're that group. But like I mentioned, a great idea is to vary the location, vary the routes, especially, it's just a great way for people who are even new to the area to get to know the running routes in the area. So you could be real creative with that. But the bottom line guideline there is use an app you could use Strava, you could use Map My Run, there's just free versions of that. And make sure you communicate with the group every week, before the rest. So if you're running on Saturday, email everybody Friday with the map and the route and all the details of where you're meeting. Put the locations of your meeting, of where you're meeting on your training plan as well.
Great idea.
So yeah, so again, that goes back to making sure you've got all that stuff pre-thought out. The guidelines about what to charge, I would say there's all of these things, there's a sweet spot. So you want to probably err on the side of not charging quite as much, but it just depends. You can kind of look at it as, if you charge a little less, make it more easier for people to get into it, but maybe you'll get more people. So as a coach and from a profit standpoint, that might be better. And it's always better to have a lot of people there. That's just goal number one. I don't want to start this thing and have one person, in my program. It's not gonna work too well. So I would generally say you have to take into consideration your specific area, demographic, and market in your area. What can people generally afford? Consider what you're going to offer. So here's, you might charge more for a longer program, for instance. If it's something like a multi-sport event, or a multi-sport program where you're going to be doing triathlon, you're going to be including swim, maybe open water swims and cycling. These are much more involved. You might charge more if you're going to hire a lifeguard, which you should. If you're going to have people out in the water, you're going to think about your direct costs in that respect. And then if you happen to have a skill set that you're going to include in this, let's just say you're going to do a running technique clinic, or a cycling clinic, or you're going to do a movement assessment on everybody, or if you've got something that you're going to add to it, you can potentially charge more. If you've got a skill set you're going to add to it. And then the other thing you want to consider in the pricing is if the race itself is going to cost them a lot of money. There's always the entry fee that they need to pay, but hopefully we've got a discount. But if we're going to if it's a travel trip, because we're going to go to some super epic location and everybody's excited, but there's an expense to that, maybe we'll charge less, just kind of things to consider. So all that said, I would say generally speaking, you to go somewhere between $99 to up to maybe $250 or more. The most I've ever charged was $250, and that was for a triathlon program, quite involved. So that's just a general guideline of what to charge.
Okay. Now, obviously, if you're the first one ever doing anything like that in your area, it's probably a little bit more difficult to find that sweet spot, as you noted right up front. One of our other guests we had on, Rachel Lehman, who's a very successful coach who lives in Akron, Ohio. She said she was sort of the first person to ever do this kind of thing, at least at scale, where she lived. So I guess, if you lived in an area where other people have done this, I guess you could also benchmark that, where you could say, okay, they charge XYZ. Now, I guess the other component is knowing if that price was successful or not. Maybe, like you said, they charged too much and one person showed up, so you wouldn't want to charge that much. But
yes,
excuse me, would you ever, let's say you knew that, Bob Smith did this last year, you saw what he charged because his website's up. Would you reach out to Bob Smith and say, hey, I saw you charge, $100 for your, 6 weeks program. How did that work out for you? Is that something you would do, or you kind of just try to figure it out on your own?
Yeah, I mean, actually, if there's an existing market, programs out there, I would definitely look at what they charge. I would, and then I would look at why too. So, interestingly, in my area, it had been done, and it had been done in the past quite successfully. So there had been some very well established group training programs. They actually weren't doing them anymore, which was why it was really nice and easy, not easy, for me to start taking up that. But yes, I do think that it's important to look at what others have charged, if that has existed before. May or may not go with that, and maybe reach out to them and ask them how it went or not. In my case, I kind of already knew that. So
okay.
And then I will say too, though, that at the end of the day, you try something. Like, you're going to figure it out eventually yourself. So I would, like I said, I would say this is maybe not everybody's advice, but I said I would almost err on that low side if you're really unsure.
Sure, makes
sense.
For
lots of reasons, but yeah.
Okay. So as a coach, obviously, you've already discussed a lot of the logistics and a lot of the things that go into this, which is pretty substantial. So as a coach, what are some of the most challenging things about putting on a group training program?
Yeah. Well, by far, the most challenging thing, especially if you're just doing it for the first time, is getting the people there, getting the word out. And then, that whole anxiety over, will I get people into the program? And in like the worst case scenarios, I have two, I got 2 people for my big group training program. So that's nerve wracking. But yeah, so the biggest challenge, I just say, is marketing. And what I definitely have seen this, like in discussions with coaches and just seeing coaches try to do different things, that there seems to be somewhat an assumption that, well, we pretty much just need to get the word out there, and then everybody's going to jump in because they know me, and it's just going to be perfectly fine. I don't really have to do too much to get people into it. And I don't know if that's why we tend to think that way. I thought that way too. I thought, well, I'll put it out there on Facebook and everybody's going to be like, yeah. Mm-hmm. And it didn't happen that way exactly. So that's the biggest challenge. And I have some advice on that end. Number one, like, actually, as I mentioned, making sure that you start marketing it well in advance. And we all know, regardless of whether somebody knows, so if you're going to use the social media channels, you're always going to go with making sure that you at least target people who know you. And I know not everybody's active on social media. It's probably the biggest place that you're going to get people to see this thing that you're doing, and people that know you already. But you have to continue to put it out there over and over and over again, almost like on a weekly basis, not a spammy way, but you may want to just say something each week or a couple of times a week that's cool about this training plan, whole program that you're planning. Like, we're going to this location, and then say something really interesting about that location every week. But leverage, I mean that positively. Family, friends, ask people to share your posts around, but be like, almost err on the side of like too much. Okay. That's the big thing. I would see coaches not do that at all. Like, put it out there once and wonder how come nobody ever signed up or whatever. So, so I think market often and keep it on their mind. That could be done email too. And just keep in mind too that as you do programs over time, you'll grow a base of people that have participated, and you'll keep that list, and you'll always, go back to that list too. So you'll have a growing list of people that have participated. So just make sure you keep track of people's emails and so forth. And then use a diversity of methods. So again, you might send out an email to people you will post it on your social media channels that you're using. You might post flyers around town. You might, like I said, we'll have like local clubs maybe announce it for you, see if these different clubs will advertise it for you, that type of thing. You can create a Facebook event. I mean, assuming Facebook's one of the channels the coach uses for that first workout. And you can actually make the first workout. So you can make the first workout free for everybody, maybe. And then again, ask people to share that event. So you'll utilize, leverage people that are what I call super spreaders, like people that have a lot of followers, a lot of pull, and ask them to just share it along and give you a good word. And the race director too potentially could advertise it out for you. Again, you're doing it to help them, so they may be helping you.
Okay.
Let's see. And then like I say, to the components of what you're offering are always important in marketing. So keep in mind, just make sure everybody knows the cool benefits and talk about that a lot.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Awesome. So you mentioned, reaching out to sort of the community, because again, I think that's, like, as you noted, that's really important, whether it be running stores or maybe other people that might be involved, like physical therapists, other people that might be in touch with runners. Again, going back to my time in New York City, a lot of the clubs, running stores, and even like stores like Lululemon would have run clubs. That being said, if you do that, you're sort of under their umbrella, I guess. So
right.
You probably can't, with respect to charging or not charging, they're not charging for that. So if you do let's say you're the run club leader for Lululemon or the Nike Run Club, you're not charging for it. Do you have any thoughts on that as far as, again, I guess if you're looking to make money, that's probably not the right route to go, unless you're trying to build a following of people that know you.
Right.
But would you say for a new coach who's just looking to get their name out, looking to, get established in the community, would you think that leading one of these run clubs through a local business that's affiliated with that local business might be a good idea, or probably err on the side of, doing their own thing and then looking to monetize that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. I think it's like, again, going back to that, possibly the free model it's got its own benefits anyways. So, and then if you're working with an organization or a club, you have a ready audience as well. So they'd be putting the word out. And if it's free, you might maybe be more likely to get people out there. Even then, I know of a coach that I talk with frequently who's doing something with the YMCA in his area, and they even still have trouble. I mean, I don't want to say trouble, but it still requires a lot of getting the word out. So whether that be through you or the organization, but the greatest thing about that, though, is, again, exposure to athletes that if they ever do want to actually have a one-on-one coaching situation, you're first on their list, which is great. And then just getting that coaching experience any way you can. Yeah.
And have you personally found that a lot of the people that have taken your group training programs converted over to one-on-one coaching? Because like, oh, wow, this Cindy really knows what she's doing. This is great. I really want to, either continue to work with her on an individual basis, or also maybe I just really want more personalized attention.
I would not say a lot. I have definitely gotten athletes. Actually, so through the in-kind sponsorship with my Tri Club, when I was doing track workouts for that group, that was probably the best conduit for that.
Okay.
But for the group training, this is a cool thing though. The group training programs, that group, whom I also consider athletes that I coach. If anybody asks me how many athletes I coach, I always include that group, because we end up doing program after program after program together. Like, I will say there's like a huge amount that keep doing the programs. And as I mentioned, I would just do one after the other. There'd be little gaps that everybody appreciated. But so those athletes don't actually ever go to the one-on-one with me. But then I will say on the flip side though, because I'm always doing these group programs, some of my one-on-one athletes benefit the other way because I always invite them to the group training program. So I'll plan their long run during, if it pretty much, well, even if it doesn't match exactly. So the one-on-one athletes I actually get benefited. I can offer to them any group training program I do, you're welcome to come and not have to pay that fee. So yeah, but I do think that it, my experience aside, I'm certain that it's an incredibly good way to get one-on-one clients.
Yeah. And I guess sort of piggybacking that question, and maybe this is a difficult one to nail down on your end of the exact percentage, but you mentioned that you have 3 a year. There's a little bit of gap in between each one. I'm guessing they're usually centered around a race. What was your, trying to think of the best way to, what was your retention, if you want to call it that, of people that would, just go from one to the next one to the next one because they loved the process, they loved your coaching, they loved the events you chose. Again, not that it denotes whether or not you were a good coach or not, because people are like, hey, I don't have that much time or I don't want to do that event. But did you find a lot of people would participate in most, if not all of them?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That's great.
It grew quite a bit. I mean, so we'd have people double up if they could, or, double up, do the subsequent programs. We actually have people excited about, like, I'm always thinking everybody's going to be a little burned out from all this, like this big training block, but they're always like, well, what are we going to do next? And I mean, yeah, it's awesome. And then we get new people along the way too. So it's really, generally speaking, has and should for anybody grow over time.
Yeah. And did you find, for back to the marketing conversation, that as it grew, that a lot of people that, your runners, your athletes, just marketed out to their friends, and that there wasn't as much of a focus or not as much of a need to do a lot of the traditional marketing tools because your athletes did a lot of the marketing for you?
Right. Yeah. I mean, they'll always want to bring a friend or something like that. Yeah. It's just always great. But also, yes, I mean, once you kind of have a base of pretty much a group of people that are pretty much always going to want to do it, I'll just say there's less pressure to try to advertise it. I personally would always really advertise well, though I just always was, my thing was I just wanted everybody to know about it, everybody to know they're welcome, and awesome. But it was really less pressure over time.
Yeah. That's great. As sort of as an aside, when I worked at this big health club in New York City, most of the sessions were an hour. They would start and end on the hour, one-on-one. And there was this area where all the programs were. So it was like Grand Central Station to have 70 trainers and all the, clients ending and then clients starting. And it was so funny to me that a lot of these clients that, would just see each other all the time, because while one was ending, the next was starting, they would just talk to each other. And all these friendships sort of started only because they saw each other, 2 or 3 times a week, at the desk waiting for their trainer to switch. So I always thought that was interesting. I always feel like, with these group training programs, group runs, group rides, such a big aspect is that camaraderie and friendships and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's as good or whatever is one-on-one is. I think that's a dynamic that, you certainly can't discount. So
yeah, for sure.
Which again is sort of a good conduit to the next one. As a coach, we just got done talking about some of the challenges of being a coach with a group training program. So what are some of the rewards from a coaching end of a group training program?
Yeah. And actually, I think that probably pretty much talked about all of those anyways along the way, but I'm at the end of the day, it's just such a good feeling. It's just such a good feeling. So much fun. And a lot of coaches, you don't have to do this, but a lot of coaches like train during the program as well. So I would be out running with everybody. I'd be out with my phone, taking pictures and video and back and forth to different, and then you're a part of your athletic community. I just think that aside from any amount of money you might make as a coach. There's so many other just fun benefits like that. Most
Sure.
rewarding. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah,
awesome. You know,
love
it's
it.
funny. It's funny you mentioned that because I certainly consider myself, for the most part, an introvert, but I was always the opposite. I always much preferred the one-on-one versus the group scenario. And as we're talking, I feel like I've missed out. I feel like I need to get back into that. So that's very cool.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, what are some examples of some successful group training programs that you've done? And I guess more specifically, what made those dynamics successful for your programs?
Yeah. And I'll just mention one. Before I do that, I'll say, generally speaking, the most successful group that we had every year was the triathlon one. And that's a little different, really helpful for people to be in a training group for triathlon, especially for the open water aspect and learning bike skills and stuff. So that aside, apart from that, like the one that's most memorable to me was a trail half marathon. I had a trail half marathon and a 10K, and it was on the island of Catalina, so just off the coast of California.
Oh,
and
nice.
It just so happens that randomly, like so many people have never even been out there. This island is so cute, and it's just like the coolest place. And so we chose that as our destination race that year. And so just that alone, it seems like, was a big draw, and everybody had a huge group. The race director was just super. It was just a really good relationship with the race director as well. Actually had some non-local people training for it as well, because he advertised it out, letting people know that this was happening and they could get a training plan at least, so.
Okay.
But it was a trail half, as I mentioned, a lot of altitude, that whole thing. And so we chose the best of our trails in our area to train on, and trails are special. I pretty much overbaked everybody. Like we really were prepared for this thing. But I would say, and not that this is our groups were about, say, average. Usually we'd have about 20 people. We didn't have like hundreds and hundreds of people doing this. The sweet amount of people is 20 to 30, I would say. And so for the Catalina one, we had maybe 25, and then we traveled out there to take a boat out, stay a couple of nights, have that extra day afterwards. We treated everybody to dinner after. Didn't end up really making any money because but that one for kind of those reasons, the trail piece, the epic location, the commitment everybody made was the most memorable.
Okay. That's great. I definitely think the destination thing is a big thing. I know this one sells out every year, the Napa marathon. I always wanted my wife to do the Napa one. That way I could just sit around all weekend and drink wine and and not run. But so any last thoughts, maybe both from the athlete side as well as the coach side, with respect to what makes a great group training program, or just some other considerations? I have a few. Well, maybe, if you don't mind, maybe I'll start. And this just came to me because from all this stuff, talking to race directors and everything, do run club or any type of leader with a group training program, do they need the insurance, and do they need to get waivers signed, and how does that whole thing work? Again, obviously you're not a race, but you're still training people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's actually one of the things I would have mentioned in my last thoughts here. You definitely need to be insured. You can get insurance as a coach, so liability insurance. That just making sure that it covers whatever you're going to be doing. So there might be a special one that you need for triathlon where you're going to have people in water. But okay. I actually think that, and sadly, think that this is probably a good idea to have that regardless of whether you're charging or not. So if you're just doing a free thing, like just, hey, let's just get together and run, it's almost better to be insured just in case, and have people sign waivers. And so I would have a waiver as part of my registration process. But if you're going to do something informal, you would just need to have people sign on paper. I think it's an absolute must.
Okay. No, that makes sense. And this is something that I would think of. Have you ever had people that get lost? I always think about this. Like, I remember when we did the certification with Jason Coop, that was one of my questions. Well, if you're doing a 100-miler, like, what happens if you get lost out there during the race? Have you ever had people that got off track? And if so, how did you deal with that as far as, meeting? Because everyone's, let's say, supposed to meet at, a certain point at the end. Has that ever happened to you, or is that something to consider?
Technically, yes, we have had people get lost. Or they're just out there for way too long. And I would be the last man standing. So I'd make sure everybody get back, right? So, and here's something I would do, by the way. I make everybody who's carrying a cell phone give me their cell phone number.
That's
every time. So, and then I would have them check themselves out on this sheet that we'd have sitting out when they got back, because some of them would get back before me and leave. Okay. And I'm like, I don't know if they're still out there. So number one, I would ask people to carry a cell phone and make sure I have the phone number. And the one time that I remember somebody getting lost is just because he was in La La Land. You just he got back eventually. He was just out there a long time, and we went driving and found him, but he finished, so I'm sure it happens. And on the trails, I have been known to backtrack and because I kind of know though how long everybody's going to be out there or how fast they go. So.
Okay.
But yeah. Hence also though the map, because if you have the map and they have it on their phone, technically they always know where they're going.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I mean, that's with technology, I guess that's one of the great things about that.
Yeah.
And this is my personal ex-personal trainer brain taking over. How did you work with cancellation policies or no-shows? Did people pay up front for the whole block? What if they missed one or two because they were sick? How did you deal with that as far as, or did you deal with that as far as cancellation policies and no-shows?
We always charged the whole fee up front, so $129. And we definitely have people pay it and never show up.
Okay.
That has happened, or they'll show up once, but we didn't refund. That was sort of upfront, like they pay. We might refund before the program starts, maybe if there was some, obviously reason that they couldn't do it. But there was one, a couple people that would always sign up for the program, like always. And then so many times they didn't ever come.
Okay.
And I just remember one time coming to a point where I'm like, because they wanted to do another program. And I'm like, what, I want you guys to have this for free because you paid so many times and haven't. And so I've done that kind of thing too, just whatever the situation is. But there was no expectation that they absolutely had to be at all of they can come to whatever they want to or not. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Gotcha. No, that makes sense. And the last thing, I guess, on my end, before you continue talking about sort of last thoughts, is one of the person who did our race director certification, Mandy Mullen, she also does group runs. She partnered, I think it's called Peculiar Brewery. She partnered with a brewery so at the end of each run, or most runs, I think they'd always end at the brewery. And I think the brewery gives like a free pint to each person, right? Hopeful that they'll not only like the beer and come back, but also hopefully buy food while they're there, and they'll make money on it.
Right.
Is that something you've ever done, or something that type of partnership? Is that something you would suggest as well, especially for for whether it be a new person starting a club or a sort of an experienced person?
I never did that, but like Mandy in particular is full of awesome ideas, and that's an awesome idea. Yeah. In fact, I never I never had them all from one location anyway. So I was always like, if we did a coffee shop, for instance, it was always a different one. So it wasn't a continual sort of relationship there. But I think that's a great idea to do something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I go there for the free beer and then,
Yeah.
run around the building one time and see if I could get another one.
Yeah.
Not so much for the running part, but so any last thoughts you had about, again, what it takes to create a powerful group training program?
Just a couple. Consider, if you're a coach, consider actually partnering with another coach to do the program. So I mentioned you don't have to have like a bunch of people helping, but it's definitely really fun to do it with another coach. And I did. So my very good friend, we would do them together. So I think that is something to consider. We also added back to the accountability piece. We would always start our group training with a quick question, like everybody check in with how's your training going, and maybe some sort of icebreaker question. So nice to get people talking before we get there and go out on the run. Everybody's warm up the brain. You could consider what I figured out over time is that you have your awesome goal event and everybody goes and does the run and you can actually hang out on the day, but it's really nice to have one more meeting after that, maybe a party, maybe a little potluck or something like that. Nice. So everybody can, so you're not at the race feeling like, it's over. I'm not going to see everybody next week. And it's a great way to regroup. So that's an idea. And you mentioned the liability insurance waiver. Let's see. For marketing or for otherwise, take a lot of pictures. Consider taking pictures. Consider using those pictures in social media all the time throughout after every training. Like let everybody know how much fun you had. And I used to put together videos. So I would I got to where I was just doing it at the end of the season, but all the pictures I'd taken or video, I'd put it together in basically a like slideshow or I used Magisto to create a video to music, just really a recap of the season. And, just send it out, you can email it out to everybody. And it always makes you cry. It's like, so much fun. Yeah. So I think those were I'm sure there was other things we didn't quite cover, but hopefully that was pretty thorough.
Yeah, no, that was great. And I think one of the biggest takeaways I got is that I do think that a lot of people go into these things, coaches, that is, with the whole, if you build it, they will come philosophy. And to your point, I'm sure putting together those videos, isn't a quick and easy thing, or at least not quick necessarily, as well as, taking the time to take photos and putting them on social media. I mean, I think that the biggest takeaway, and there was a lot of great information for me, is that it takes a lot of effort to do this and to do it well. And again, your expectations should probably align with how much effort you're putting into marketing and doing the work and making it a great experience. So.
Yeah. It is a lot of work when I'm thinking through all these things, like, wow, that's a lot, but it doesn't feel like it. It just feels, I guess it's just worth it.
Yeah. Cause on the flip side, I do think that I could see how a lot of people could be like, oh, I'll just do a run club. That'll be easy. And then the same as like putting on a 5K, I'll just put on a 5K. And the reality is that while enjoyable, to do it, like you just noted, there's still work involved. And if you want it to be successful, it is probably about partnerships and just, putting the work into making it be a great event.
Right. Exactly.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time on this. This is great. And again, I think it'll be really helpful to all of our, not just running coaches, but, multi-sport cycling coaches on things to consider when getting started with a group training program.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you. It was fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much. All right. Well, that is it. Hopefully all of you guys got a lot out of this program, and we will see you soon.